In this video, we'll see how to enforce the foreign key constraint on a table in Oracle. The context for this example is going to be our same small family counseling practice that we worked with in other examples. And here we'll now be scheduling counseling sessions for clients. And so we're going to need to have our list of clients. So let's go ahead and get our background set up. So here we're going to create a table that's got first name, last name, phone number, and a unique identifier for the client called client ID. We'll go ahead and get some records entered into that table so we've got some data to work with. We're also going to go ahead and create our appointment table. So our appointment table is going to look somewhat similar. We've got a unique identifier for the appointment that's marked as the primary key. And then we've got the counselor who will be providing the counseling, the client ID, the identifier of the client who will receive the counseling, room number, start time, and duration. Let's go ahead and get a few records put into that table as well, then we'll take a look at the data that we've got. The important thing here is that our client ID in the appointment table is going to refer to the client ID in the client table. So in other words, when we've got the record of an appointment here, what we're saying is that this is appointment number 2. Counselor Quinn Fowler is going to be counseling client number 101. Well, who's client number 101? Client number 101 is Sandra Welch. That appointment is going to happen at a particular date and time and location. And so when we're talking about the foreign key constraint, we're talking about this column right here, the client ID over here in the appointment table, referencing the client ID here in the client table. The idea is that when we put a number here, we want Oracle to be sure before that record is allowed to be entered into the counselor, or before it's allowed to be entered into the appointment table, we want to make sure that that number exists over here in the client table, so that when we say client number 101, we know exactly who that is. And so here's our task. We're going to try to enter this record. So the next appointment, appointment number 5, it's going to be a counseling appointment for Elizabeth Baker. She's the counselor. It'll be for client number 107. And then we have information about the location, date, and time. Now, the trouble with this is that client number 107 doesn't exist. Clients end at 105. And so this will be a problem. If we allow this record to get entered into the table, then we're going to have an invalid reference. We will say this appointment is for client number 107, but we have no idea who client 107 is. Because we don't have any constraints on this table yet, Oracle should allow this record to go in. And so let's take a look at that. Take a look at that appointment. So here we see that record went in just fine. We've got appointment number 5. It's for the counselors, Elizabeth Baker, and client 107, but we have no idea who client number 107 is. So that's a problem. So we're going to create this table again, but this time we're going to do it with the foreign key constraint. We're going to ask Oracle to enforce the foreign key constraint. So here's how we specify it. On the column that we want to enforce the constraint on, right after we put the data type, we're just going to go ahead and specify that this column is going to reference another table. And so the table that it references here is going to be client. So what we're saying here is that when we have the client ID, when we put a value in the client ID column here, before Oracle allows that record to be inserted, it's going to look up and make sure that that value exists in the primary key of the client table. And the rest of the table will get created as normal. So now we'll go ahead and get our background data put in here. We'll get a few records entered. And we'll take a look at that same problematic insert that we tried before. So for reference, here's our client data and our counselor data here. Let's go ahead and try to insert this record referring to client number 107. Now, in this case, Oracle has rejected the insert. It tells me the integrity constraint has been violated and that there's no parent key found. So that's good, exactly what we wanted it to do. Let's go ahead and fix the problem. We'll specify a valid client ID, and now Oracle should allow that record to go in. And so here we take a look at that record. So Oracle lets it come in when the value is valid, when it exists in the primary key of the client table. Otherwise, it's going to reject it. Now, there's a couple of other ways to build that constraint. Let's take a look at them. The way that we've done so far works well when there's only a single column in that foreign key. So let's take a look at some other syntax. So if we either want to specify the name of the constraint, or if we need to specify that it's on more than one column, in other words, the primary key we're referencing is a composite primary key, then we're going to have to put the constraint at the end of the table. So in other words, we're creating all the columns and data types for the table here. Now, after we've finished those, we'll go ahead and put the constraint statement in. So we'll say constraint, we give it a name, we'll name the constraint, we'll just call it the appointment client foreign key constraint. We then say the type of constraint it is. This is going to be a foreign key constraint. And then we put the list of columns that it's on. In our case, it's still just a single column, but if we had more columns to put in here, we could just put them here as a comma-separated list. We then are going to tell it which table it references. So we say references, and then we put the table name. And then that should be it. So we should be able to create that table now here, and that's the second way to introduce that constraint. So a third way allows us to create a multiple column foreign key without needing to specify the name. So let's take a look at that syntax. We'll drop the table, and we'll get started again. So here's the way we specified the constraint in the prior example. But as it turns out, saying constraint and giving it a name isn't necessary. So if I backspace over that, I can just bring in the type of constraint it is, the column that I'm applying the constraint to, and then which table it references. In this case, Oracle will determine the name of the key for me. It will determine the name of the constraint for me. All right, we'll go ahead and insert our data back in, and we'll look at one other thing that now becomes an issue. Let's take a look at the data. All right, so now we've got our data in here, and we have several appointments that are referencing these clients. What that foreign key constraint says is it says, listen, Oracle, make sure that if I have a value here in the client ID column of this table, that it's a valid client ID over here in this table. So let's take a look at what would happen if, say, we tried to drop that client table. Let's go ahead and try to drop that table. Oracle will not let me drop the table, and it says it's not able to do that because the table is referenced by foreign keys. But now let's suppose that we're not trying to drop the whole table, but we just want to delete a particular record. So let's examine the possibility of deleting a particular client out of the client table. So here we're trying to delete this record here, client ID 104, Gene Man. Now if I take a quick look over here at the appointment table, I don't see that client in here. So deleting that record would not cause an invalid reference over here in the client table. And so Oracle should allow this delete statement to happen. And so that record gets deleted just fine. But what happens if we try to delete one where there is a reference? So what's going to happen if we try to delete this record where the client ID is 105? Again, here, there's already an appointment scheduled for 105, and if we allow that one record to be deleted, it would create an invalid reference between these two columns. And so we'll see that if we try to execute that, Oracle will reject that from happening because of the violation of that primary key constraint. And so that's how we enforce the foreign key constraint here on the table in Oracle. This is actually the way that Oracle enforces the more general term referential integrity.